Hello, friend. Okay, I'm just going to do a little response video to some comments I've received from the previous video I put up, Inspired Insights Podcast, Episode 1, What Would Your Spirit Say? Spiritual Guidance. I think I'll probably be doing a little bit more of response videos like this too, because these are helpful for people other than just the person I'm having the discussion with, in order to start to get contemplations that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise, and maybe start to get insights that they might not receive otherwise, right? As you grow spiritually, it's fun to listen to conversations that you're maybe not participating in directly and getting insights on those. And not just getting the insights, but examining the insights you're receiving, having the contemplations about those, right? Okay, so the comment is, I listened to your first episode on YouTube when do you think the mind connects with the body and the mind? Like when we're kids, we don't understand what death feels like. We don't worry about anything as a kid. Do you think we get a soul installed into us at a certain point? Or does life program your soul? I always have a hard time with the purpose of life. We are here one moment and then we're gone. What is the point of the universe? What is God's plan if the end game what is the point of the universe? What is God's plan? What is the end game? What is the point of heaven and hell? What is the point of all of this? What is this? It's like we've done everything but have done nothing. So many questions to unpack there. I'll start from the beginning. I listened to your first video on YouTube. When do you think the mind connects to the body and mind? Now, all of these topics, we have to consider the nature of what we are, because if we're inconsiderate of the nature of what we are, we're moving forward right from a broken premise, right from the get-go. And we can't end up in truth without an intent and understanding of truth. So we gotta check our steps all along the way, right? To see where we're interpreting from, instead of making assumptions that we're hitting these marks along the way without checking in, right? So when does the mind connect to the body and the mind? We have to examine our own experience. All of these questions are meant to be introspective, meaning we're not meant to buy into belief systems. We're not meant to buy into opinions of others. We're meant to examine our own experience. So if you examine your own experience, when can you validate that you were ever inconsiderate of the body? Just because we're older now doesn't mean that when we were young, we weren't consciously aware, that we didn't have conscious awareness going on. We forget things all the time. So it takes an assumption to have the idea that we weren't always consciously aware of our present experience, even back then, because we can't prove that to be true. We can only prove that we don't remember it right now. Okay? But when we consider the fact that we exist right now as consciousness, we exist right now. You exist right now. Yet you can't prove when you started. There's no way to prove when you started. There's no way to disprove that you had a start. All we can prove when we examine our consciousness is that we exist right now. So isn't it interesting that although we exist, we can't prove that we ever began? I'm talking from the perspective of consciousness, not the physical body, right? I'm not trying to interpret these from a perspective of what we are not, which is the physical body. Again, I'm coming back to the interpretation of from the perspective of what we are, which is consciousness itself. And if we're consciousness ourselves and we can't prove that we started. We can't prove when we started as consciousness. There becomes now a consideration of eternalness. What if consciousness that we are always was, because we can't prove it to be that we ever began? So if there was no beginning, was it always there? We actually have more of a validation in our experience, since we can't prove that we began, that it's more likely, experientially, that we are eternal as consciousness. So when does the mind connect to the body and the mind? I would say, considering the spiritual realms, when it identifies with it. When it doesn't identify with the body, it's having its own experience in consciousness. When you're having a dream and you're conscious of the dream, you're not conscious of the body, but yet the body could be present within the dream, but it's not necessarily connected to the body in that moment, is it? It's where your attention is focused. The next question, like when we are kids, we don't understand what death feels like and we don't worry about anything as a kid. That's because when we're kids, we haven't been subjected to the cultural influencing and programming of what death is. Death itself is a misunderstanding. Death itself is a lie. If we're not the body and we're consciousness, and when we leave the body, it's just consciousness leaving the body, but consciousness being eternal continues on. And the body lays there because it's no longer being animated and energized by this consciousness. What really dies? Does anything really die? Consciousness continues on. If you watch documentaries on or testimonials on people having near-death experiences when they leave the body, they're more conscious than they were before because they're no longer distracted by the physical senses and the physical interpretations. It's now all a consciousness perspective. So death becomes a program and a fear that we are given by carnal ignorance that's inconsiderate of us being consciousness. The next question is, do you think we get a soul installed into us at a certain point, or does life program your soul? I would say as long as we're having the experience, we're present, and that the soul doesn't get installed to us. The soul, the consciousness, is what we actually are. And what happens is we can have things influence our conscious awareness, and then if we identify with that thing, then we have an experience. So, like this, if we take it back to meditation and you're surrendering all thoughts, you won't be disturbed. If a sad thought arises and we surrender the investment in that sad thought, it's impossible to create a sad experience. We've repented it. We've surrendered it, identification and investment with it. But if we have a thought of sadness and our conscious, we examine it with our consciousness and we consent to it and we agree to it and we invest into it, now that programs our experience with a sad experience. We have to agree to it. So it's like installing sadness by consenting to a sad thought, or installing happiness by consenting to a happy thought. But the happy thought and the sad thought are not us. We're the consciousness that's just aware of those things. The sadness and the happiness are impermanent because they're not the eternal consciousness itself. So we can invest in those thoughts and have that experience, but as we grow in mindfulness that we are consciousness and that we don't have to invest in every thought, now all of a sudden we get to have a more deliberate experience. We get to surrender thoughts that we aren't interested in experiencing and creating. Okay? The next question is, I've always had a hard time with life, the purpose of life. We are here one moment and then we are gone. What is the point of the universe if God's... what is the point of the universe? What is God's plan? And what is the end game? This again, if we look at it from the perspective of consciousness and understand that we are consciousness, and this takes introspection. This isn't about a belief system. This is going into meditation, watching the mind, watching the thoughts arise, surrendering the thoughts, identifying with consciousness itself, not with what we are conscious of. And what we see is the purpose is to learn to refine out the misidentifications that are not consciousness and begin to more increasingly identify with the consciousness perspective itself. This is the God piece of us. This is the divine piece of us. This is the eternal piece of us. This is the omnipresent piece of us. This is the omnipotent piece of us. This is the omniscient part of us. That's our consciousness itself is the spark of the divine. And the plan, the end game, is to refine out all these things that we're choosing that are illusory and egoistic interpretations, refine all those out and get back to the pure state spiritually where we're letting consciousness lead us rather than the egoistic thoughts, the untrue programs. And only then can we create an experience that's heavenly, because now it's in alignment with pure consciousness, pure truth, pure love, unconditional love, rather than the ego's creations of stress and hate and anger and trauma and fear. Your own pure spirit doesn't have those perceptions. Those are all egoistic. So what we're learning to do spiritually is refine out the ego's perceptions and step more and more into the perspective of pure consciousness and look at the world through that lens. Heaven and hell are all an interpretation from the perspective of either consciousness or ego. We've all sinned. Is Satan doing that to us? Is God testing us? If we examine the experience when we're sinning, it's just a thought that arises, and we are either consenting to it or repenting it. And we're going to manifest an experience based on whether we consent to kicking the dog or repent the thought of kicking the dog. We're going to manifest an experience, which has karmic implications. That doesn't mean that God is judging us. That means within every thought and action is inherently a consequence, a karma, right? For good or bad. For good or bad. Karma itself isn't bad. It's the nature of creation. If you think a sad thought and invest into it, you create sadness, karmically. If you think a happy thought and you invest in it, you agree to it, you consent to it, you create an emotion of happiness. Karma is inconsiderate of anything other than what you're consenting to or repenting in that moment. Or prior moments, there's a cumulative past trauma, karma, that still needs to be processed. But we have to understand the nature of consciousness is what I just laid out there. We create our experience based on what we invest in consciously. So if a sad thought arises due to an egoistic prompt and fear conditioning from culture or news or something like that, and we agree to it and we invest in it and we identify with it with our consciousness, we're saying yes to that experience of fear. But if it arises and we surrender our investment to it, we turn our attention away from it, we're saying no, we're repenting that experience of fear, and thus it isn't activated, it's not created. So when you understand these things, the questions that we're asking change. And we could ask these questions and be inconsiderate of spirit, and we would never really grow in understanding because we're trying to understand something based on a false premise. We are consciousness. We are not a physical body. So if we want the truth of something, we have to be considerate of our consciousness. Okay? Heaven and hell are mindsets. Okay? I don't encourage people to invest in fear, unlove, hate, anger. I encourage people to become introspective, watch the nature of their mind, practice surrendering unloving prompts so that you can learn how powerful you are, learn how much you affect your own experience in creation by the thoughts that you choose to consent to or repent to. Okay? Great questions, important questions. Many people have these questions. Keep the questions coming. The encouragement is to begin to watch our mind in a meditative state. Just close your eyes and watch what the mind becomes aware of thought-wise. And as those thoughts arise, practice surrendering the importance of them. Even if they're good thoughts in the moment, practice surrendering them and just being in a state of complete stillness. Your consciousness is not those thoughts. Your consciousness is what's conscious of those thoughts. See how far back you can sit in consciousness itself. It's a blissful state. It's a deepened, peaceful state. That's your natural state. That right there is the state of unconditional love. So when we say God is unconditionally loving, and again we look at our consciousness as this piece that's godly, because it's omnipresent, eternal, omniscient, omnipotent. It's also, with all the thoughts surrendered, your very own consciousness is unconditional love. So you start to see how this piece of God that many religions make the mistake of externalizing, the true spiritual religions like Buddhism and Hinduism or even ancient Egyptian religion, they knew, and they were all prior to the monotheistic religions, they all knew that we are itself divine. Our consciousness is God. Okay? They were empowering, spiritually empowering in that respect, where afterwards these monotheistic religions come along and they are very spiritually disempowering. They don't want you to understand that you are God as consciousness. They want God to be external so that they can manipulate you and get you to buy into what they're selling so that they can control you and spiritually disempower you. Okay? Bless them. There's lessons for people that subscribe to those religions that are spiritually disempowering. I've played with some of those in my past experiences. Sometimes we have to go into them in order to learn their limitations, right? Right. So I'm not creation's perfect, and those religions are perfect for the people that need to learn the lessons that those religions will provide them. Okay? No religion is so perfectly spiritually pure. There's always some sort of egoistic limitation beyond them. Religion isn't God. Okay? Religion isn't pure consciousness. We're not meant to read a book like the Bible to understand God. Our consciousness is God. We're meant to examine our consciousness and understand the nature of creation from that perspective, not read books and be inconsiderate of this piece of consciousness within us that is God, right? But few people understand that in our culture. But the more you understand it and apply it, that's where the liberation happens. Okay? Bless you, friend. If you'd like to help out the channel, please like, share, and subscribe as inspired.